A good afternoon or morning, wherever you are. My name is Calvin Cottar. I have a long history in the Mara with my parents, my grandparents, doing various kinds of tourism. And I have had the honor and privilege to work with the community in the area, and Samson, who's on the panel for the last 30 years, and Mohanjit, who runs Game Watchers for the last, I would say, 20 plus years. I'm here to just moderate this event. It is not my normal role. Usually I'm on the panel, so it's new ground for me, but I've faced buffaloes before, so we'll do it. So the issues we are facing today is the Mara and its and the Conservancy's model, and is it an option for the future for other parts of Africa? And I would like to just say that the Mara has been one of the most successful conservation areas in the world. And one could say that its overcongestion is the downside of this success. The downside of the success along the rivers and in developments. And this has led to some impact on the wildlife numbers and actually tourism experiences. There have been efforts recently to increase the prices to moderate that, and we'll wait to see what the effect is of that. But for some of us, like Mohanjit, and about 40, I think 49 other lodges, we have been always outside the reserve anyway. And for our own businesses, we have had to basically lease the land around us. The big challenge has been title deeds have been that's the way of land in Kenya. You get your title deed as a landowner. And so you have rights to your land, full rights to your land. You can fence it, you can farm it. So the Maasai landowners in our areas have been fencing and farming it because wildlife has not historically been valuable to them. So we have done different models of leasing. And leasing the land just entails cutting a deal with hundreds or thousands of owners individually and sometimes collectively in communities to make biodiversity pay from our tourism. So I can honestly say it has been a success from my perspective. We are all members of the Maasai Mara Wildlife Conservancies Association, and we encompass just under 2,000 square kilometers and about 49, I think there could be 50 lodges are involved now, where we pay from our own businesses to lease land, as opposed to the 200 lodges on the edges of the Mara and inside the Mara Reserve itself, who don't lease land outside, but go into the reserve. So the question is, which is better, and what use is there for this Mara model going into the larger landscape of conservation, but also for tourism experience? Is it better? Is it worse? So I'd like to open to the panelists here and introduce Mohanjit Bra, who runs Game Watchers and has, I mean, probably one of the biggest impacts in the landscape has been Mohanjit's company. And I'd like to ask Mohanjit, what is your effect, or what is your ideas of what I've just said about the Conservancy and the success of the conservancies?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Calvin. And great to be on here with everyone, and also with my friends and fellow panelists who I've known for some time. So I think, Calvin, it's great to be on this panel and really discussing one of the premier wildlife and community destinations in the world. I think, it's a real honor and pleasure to be on here. I think, you were mentioning the community conservancy model. And I just, when I look back and think about Kenya and think about the Mara specifically, we realize that, over 60-70% of the wildlife in Kenya is outside these gazetted national and the gazetted reserves and national parks. And the question is, where is the wildlife? It's on community land. And I think, for so much of the community, like where Samson is from, the Maasai have lived with these wildlife for so very long. And we know that this is one reason the wildlife is there, but it's also important to realize that the population was very small at that time. And the community were nomadic pastoralists moving around. And now population growth in Kenya, over 56 million, very high growth rate, with the Narok County having some of the highest population growth rate within within Kenya. And just really no longer being nomadic, people are sitting still. So I'm just kind of building up the context of where we've come from and what are the challenges. And I think when we look back as game watchers, and our founder Jake Greaves Cook 19 years ago came to the Mara in Old Kinye, and we weren't even adjacent to the park. Old Kinye, as you know, is fairly little ways away from the park, and engage with the community to see how can they start getting real benefit, and not just a few people, but the wider community getting direct payments into it. So I would say, looking at what has happened as Old Kinye is one example, that hundreds of landowners are getting benefits every month. And then from the tourism experience, I think, Calvin, one of the things I would say that's really helped the conservancy concept is that it's limiting the number of camps, limiting the number of vehicles, and linking it to habitat. I think when we look at overdevelopment in tourism destinations, the Mara, or even other places globally, it's about overdevelopment and too many numbers of accommodation or people or vehicles. So the model that we were involved in, every room has to pay to protect 700 acres of habitat. Now, when you do that, you are automatically limiting the vehicles roughly to 1,400 acres per vehicle, which now you're able to have a higher quality experience. You're not having the issues that we've seen from some of the scientific reports, especially within the Mara ecosystem, of too much development around areas of wildebeest, cheetahs being impacted. And I think, as you're saying, the conservancies now outside the reserve are actually bigger than the reserve. And I think one of the key things for me also is the governance. I think when we look at conservancies, with working closely with the Maasai leaders and even the women, and having them on the boards and really in the driving seat of, together with the investor, of moving this forward. Maybe with those few comments, I'll pass it back to you, Calvin, for my other colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mahanjit. I mean, that was just some incredible statistics there, that we're bigger than the Maasai Mara Reserve itself. And that, we've got to factor in the community and the equity in part of all of this. I'd like to just housekeeping. I forgot housekeeping. If you have any questions, please put it in the chat there. And if we don't have time to answer your questions, we'll get back to you on our email later. We will answer everyone. Just that. I'd like to bring it to Samson Olelengia, who I've known a long time, who works in the county government. He is an advisor to the governor, in fact, on all wildlife matters. So he has a special influence on what is going to happen for us all in the future in the Mara. And so thank you, Samson. And I would like to ask you, Sam, what is the importance of conservancies for wildlife in Narok County, in your view?
Well, thank you very much, everybody. I believe we are all probably 1 hour either ahead or behind ourselves. So I would comfortably say good afternoon, everybody. And thank you so much, Calvin and the rest of the people. And it's a great pleasure to see friends and colleagues like you who I've known for many years, including Dr. Mahanjit Ba and the rest of the people that I've not met. But it's a great pleasure to be with you today. In fact, I had like to strain a little bit because I'm in my rural home, but I said it's an important discussion to explore the best we can discuss, so that at least a way forward can be found for the jewel in the crown as far as the Mara is concerned. Let me start by saying, yes, I work as a wildlife advisor to the governor based in the Maasai Mara, working with Mr. Brian Heath and the Mara Conservancy, but essentially looking at policy issues as far as wildlife is concerned in the entire county. First and foremost, I think we are coming, all of us, from a very historical perspective as protected areas management, where they were formed and established and boundaries were drawn on the absence of consensus building and the involvement of the communities. Because if you read very carefully, and I'm bringing this in while alive with what is happening today in Kenya, where the government of Kenya is giving the Maasai back to the Amboseli. And I don't want to deal with it because that is a very highly emotive policy issue from the President of the Republic. But I'm just saying how the Mara and the Amboseli was conceived in the first place pre-colonial era. The two land or the two areas belong to the Maasais. And also are typical grazing lands from the Maasai people. But how it was conceived and negotiated, it was as a result of the Maasai themselves. So historically, these areas were a people-driven agenda. But whether it was anchored in the traditional law and in the independence and pre-colonial laws, that is a question that I cannot answer at this moment. But if I come today to what's happening in the Mara National Reserve, wildlife, as my colleagues have just mentioned, 65 or 70% or 60, depending on who has written what article and who has done what research. But I think we can all say around 60% of our wildlife reside within the community conservancies, which is now today the umbrella of many conservancies around the Republic of Kenya. But if we zero into the Mara, then we are talking about the umbrella where the 24 conservancies under the MMWCA are situated. But I think we need also to be in cognizance of the fact that wildlife cannot be managed in isolation without considering the core area. I believe if we look at the Mara National Reserve, about 10 square kilometers, and we look about the Serengeti National Park, slightly over 14,000 square kilometers. If you look at the Serengeti, the buffer zones are the game reserves and the wildlife control areas that protect the incursion of livestock incursion, human population into the core area, which is absent actually in the Mara until when communities started coming in and the TPs, the tourists, the tour operators started coming in to establish very successful conservancies. This is now when we are having what we can call technically in protected areas management as buffer zone, because I believe community conservancies are buffers, safe havens from the core area, which has been a very good success. I mean, if you look at Olkinyei, where Porini, where Muhanjit comes from, and you look at Olderkesi, and you look at Nabosha and the rest, every other conservancy has its own model of management as far as governance is concerned. But I think one critical convergence that we all have in common is how we manage our wildlife, which is a great success. But there are very critical challenges. Before I come to what is happening today with the $200 and whether the government will increase in future or whether it will reduce, I don't know. But given my own experience, there are three major challenges we have in the Mara. And I don't want to really just say verbative repetition as what Mahanjit has said. I think the cancer of the Mara today, the big cancer in the Mara, which I don't know what medicine will be a cure to that, is for me greed. And I want to say without fear of contradiction that how would we manage a protected area of about 10 square kilometers with, first of all, 49 facilities? And if we compare 10 square kilometers and comparing with the Serengeti, which is above 14,000, I mean, it's unrealistically ecological. Any ecologist, even without doing a scientific research, will say the Mara is overpopulated. And where are those 49 facilities inside the reserve? Live about outside the reserve are situated. We're talking about 100, or slightly 150 facilities within and outside the National Reserve. So I think for me, we have suffocated wildlife habitats in the exchange of revenue and money making. And who are doing this? I think it's a collaboration between the two operators the county government, and the national government. Of course, with the local people, because we are talking about benefits. So who is benefiting and how do we benefit? I think we need to have a very well-structured way of managing protected areas. And I want to take a cue with KWS. KWS gives you a site in a park, and no one can be within a radius of between 25 and 30 square kilometers. That gives you an area of a niche of marketing. So there'll be a high end in terms of game viewing. There'll be less overcrowding. There'll be less harassment of wildlife, and there'll be less environmental congestion and environmental pollution. But if you look at the Mara today, you are talking about less than 5 kilometers away from one camp to another camp. So what are we talking about? We are talking about a filthy congestion of a reserve. And the end result will be that we are chasing wildlife from their own habitat. Most of the critical habitats today, I would say, without again fear of contradiction, the last 15, 20 years have been a nightmare in the Mara National Reserve. I don't know whether my system has stopped. Hello, colleagues. Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you, Samson. I think Calvin's coming back.
Yeah.
Sorry,
so
I
saying,
lost you there.
Yeah, so I'm saying, if we give a comparison, what we used to say, compare and contrast, how KWS allocate facilities and how the Mara allocate facilities is such a disastrous experience. But if you look at across the border in Tanzania, there's still a disparity. And I think we need to manage a national reserve like the Mara. We need to have a very highly structured way where facilities can be looked at so that you may look at the background of an ecological advisory opinion, a more scientific approach, other than just like building every camp in every other bush. So the end result today, and yes.
Can I ask you, if the Mara Management Plan and the Greater Ecosystem Management Plan is a step in that direction? Can you hear me, guys? Yeah, it's a step in that direction.
I'm coming up, Calvin.
Yeah.
I'm coming there, Calvin. So I'm just saying in summary so that I may allow other panelists. I think we have seen a lot of sporadic and uncontrolled, haphazardly building of facilities anyhowly in the Mara. And I would reckon today, if a serious scientific study is commissioned to not just assess the impact of tourism facilities inside and outside the reserve and the general ecosystem, I would for sure say that the distribution of the herbivores within the Mara, the larger mammalic species like the rhinos today, I worked as a rhino warden, so I know the experience. I know the number of animals that has been chased as a result of selfish investment opportunities in quotes. And we have seen a lot of push and pull between the investors and wildlife. So whether that can be solved by a management plan is another thing. I think the Narrow County Council has just launched a management plan. Are we following, first of all, the management plan to the latter? That's a question to us. I might not, as an advisor, I might not say we are really following. We could be following in terms of infrastructural development, in terms of, well, I don't know. Yeah, infrastructural development in terms of road and improving the rangers' facilities.
Lost. Are you there? Are you there?
think his network is frozen. Yeah.
Can you see me? Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, I think he was getting at the point that there's a management plan that is not being followed. But I think that's we're not going to go down that road too much, because that's county government, and I think just steer it back to the conservancy. The conservancies simply adds value to land that has biodiversity, wildlife on it, and tourism is the agency of funding that. So the question that we all have really is, where should you put your clients? If you're a tour operator, or if you're in tourism journalism, what should we be advocating and recommending? I mean, money is needed on the ground. The biggest threat to wildlife is land use change. And we need government regulations. We've got a Maasai Mara management plan gazetted by our governor, who Samson works for. We've got the ecosystem, the greater ecosystem management plan, which clearly states where wildlife is a priority land use. But a land use plan without the money is useless, which is why what Mohanjit is doing, what the Conservancy lodge operators are doing, is very heroic. And, you know, I want to just touch on a few things I've been seeing recently, and that is that it's not equal, it's not equitable, that it only goes to the patriarchy who own the land. Of course, that's the Maasai way. Would you say that's a bit of an issue, Mohanjit?
Well, I think that, yeah, I think, Calvin, obviously with the conservancy concept, as you know, outside the Mara, I think one of the real reasons we've seen it scale is that it's actually going directly to the community landowners,
yes,
based on how much land they put aside. And I think that's really been a paradigm shift.
Yeah. So the other thing, and this is where I'll bring Chris into it. Chris, thank you for being so patient there. I know we need to hear from your perspective and that side of the equation, and that is, are tourists or are guests even interested in conservation, or do they just look at the pretty pictures and do they not care? I mean, what is your opinion on the tourism client that you're looking at?
Yeah, thanks, Calvin. Thanks for having me. Interesting topic, obviously, and one that's quite topical. I think that you got to look at that in two ways. One is, how do they choose where they go, and who do they buy? And in the same vein, who sells them the trip? So, you know, that's the tour operator in their home country for the most part, and on any point in the spectrum between really cares and really doesn't care. And of course, price plays a role as well. And then the second way you've got to look at it is, after they've traveled, what their perspective is, and what that means for word of mouth or other referral. And in both of those, I think obviously a lot of the people on the call today represent either the lodge operators, and we've got to ask ourselves, are we putting our money where our mouth is, and do we make it tangible, the experience? Do we make that experience tangible for our guests? So it's one thing to say, you know, I won't use the Mara as an example here, but somewhere else. It's one thing to say, well, we're leasing the land from XYZ community and the money goes there. It's an entirely different thing if the people who stay with you don't have any tangible experience of that. There's no sort of participation or kind of proof in the experience. And then the other, one of the other major parties on the call today would be the tour operator, which is, you know, obviously you're selling the best possible product at the right price for your client, but equally as the lodge operator bears some responsibility for this, so the responsible tour operator must too. And so in promoting tourism in a particular area, and I say that with the presumption that everyone in that part of the industry, both sides, lodge and tour operator, and of course this is a flawed presumption, cares that ecotourism is a major funder of conservation, and ecotourism is, while not a panacea, is a good mechanism for effecting positive change. And there are lots of examples of that. So in brief answer to your question, I think when they first hear about it, the first time safari goer doesn't have the sophistication yet in understanding the nuances of the industry to choose between one operator or the other. And that very much depends on advice that the tour operator gives them, or let's say the media, PR, or marketing that the lodge operator is doing independently. But the real possibility in terms of winning those hearts and minds is in the experience on the ground.
Thank you, Chris. I mean, I would like to suggest that as climate change and biodiversity loss throughout the world is increasingly evident, that the tourism industry has to make a total change in its attitude across the landscape, and that every part of the sales chain and the activities should be primarily focused on
Hello,
land
Calvin.
security. Hey, Soba, iko wapi doi?
Now, just give me 1 minute to wind up
okay.
because I'm having challenges in my
Okay,
network.
okay.
So I was
endelea.
saying, so that those were the issues faced by the Mara before. Today has to enact the management plan. What we need to do in the current regime is that if we can, all of us as stakeholders, help them to ensure that the management plan is going to be implemented to issues, the critical issues of tourism congestion addressed to, that will be, to me, that will be a milestone. Of course, it will be a difficult thing to reduce the facilities, but I think we can discuss on ways that can be addressed, maybe in a more scientific way, so that if we have facts as stakeholders, I think the government can listen. If we talk without facts, then it will be just a normal discussion. Because I know I've worked with politicians, and today if I tell the governor, this is exactly what we need to do, he will tell me, can you give me facts? And that's exactly what every other government will rely on. So I think if we can input the government and put a little bit of pressure so that we can have ecologists in place, people with knowledge so that we may produce data. I think if we have scientific data, I think they can listen and probably we may have a way forward. Lastly, so that I may allow you to discuss, because I know my network is very bad, we also need to ensure or address the issues of the livestock and the people. But more importantly, who benefits from wildlife. I think, again, that's another dynamic, that who really gets the money from wildlife? Do the benefit trickle down to the household, the poor of the poor? Because if it does, then we'll not have resistance of issues of human-wildlife conflict. But if it is an elite capture, again, then that becomes another problem. So if we can address those issues in the Mara, probably we might not be as much there, but we could be a place to be learn from. We could be probably a place where you can learn a little bit of lessons.
Yeah. Thank you so much,
so
Samson. Appreciate your opinion.
If I get again my connectivity, I can join.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Asheoling. I think, thank you so much. That's great that he could join us again. Yeah, I was just saying that we got to change. I'll come back to Samson's comments, but I'll just finish my train of thought, which is that there's a bigger issue here, which is how do the young generations feel that there's $1 trillion in the world transitioning to the next generation right now. They're the ones, the 25 to 30-year-olds are buying our safaris. And how do they think about safaris? And so I think increasingly we have to have much more defined methods of justifying our existence out here, charging money. And I think what Mahanjit and the Conservancies have done is very clearly one way, which is 600 acres per room or whatever it might be, or it could be how much you put into securing land. And just to make sure that we understand that National Reserve and national parks, as important as they are, they're funded by the national treasury or the local treasury, not by the tourism dollar that actually that you pay when you enter. It all goes to the treasury and then comes back in the budget. So whether a lodge is inside or outside, we are still paying for that ultimately through our taxes. But and that money that is used by county governments or the national government, it goes to a whole lot of different priorities, which is health, medicine, water, into the centers where the urban people are. Whereas leasing is very much a direct relationship between you and the landowners around you, or even the landowners far from you, but that are important for the corridors. And that's why we're building through Maasai Mara Wildlife Conservancy Association this bigger connectivity model, which is far from tourism, so that landowners, or rather tourism partners inside the reserve, on the edge of the reserve, can join in and actually lease land outside, far from where they are. You don't have to lease where your lodge is what I'm trying to say, because our landscapes are important. So I just wanted to say that we have to define how tourism, in my view, how tourism is shown to be sustainable, and it should be through securing land, and land is equity. Again, equity, like who really gets the money. So that is kind of what Samson was touching on, that the Mara management plan, the ecosystem management plan does offer that, but without the money, it's useless. So that's what I would say. If I was to get anything out of this meeting, this webinar, it would be to try to help folks selling safaris and doing safaris to understand that land is everything. And otherwise in the future, we'll be the bad guys. If we're not putting money into land, truly threatened land, we'll be looked at as bad as hunting. We'll be actually the bad guys. So don't make money if you're not securing land and species, threatened species. That's just a little bit of a rant there. But I don't know what you have to say a little bit, if you have any thoughts on how can I don't know. Can you hear me, Chris?
We lost you in the middle there, but
oh no,
I think you're asking Mahanjit a question.
Okay, yeah, it's to either you or Mahanjit. How can we sell the idea of sustainable tourism is all about leasing land and equity for rural landowners, where the wildlife actually is? How do we sell that idea? I mean, how do we make it attractive?
I mean, that's a really good question, because I think you probably find in the global audience that not everyone understands that that conservation really amounts to the sharing of a land resource, both with the natural ecosystem and the human needs, population needs. So, very simply, very clearly, conservation is about land, intact ecosystems, and the ability for biodiversity to function. So getting, I think, people to appreciate that has got to be the start of it. So, for example, if you take eco-labeling, certification, or what have you, which, I mean, I'll give you a rant now, if you like, just to make it even. It's very Northern Hemisphere centric, and to be honest, whatever the specification of the light bulb is couldn't be less relevant in relation to the amount of land that's conserved. So I think, yeah, and listen, maybe I'm just being very opinionated here, and I've got my own particular perspective, but I think until we get away from this being the idea of sustainability, what light bulb you have and whatever, it's and focus more on the fact that you conserve land and therefore ecosystems, and therefore things can function in a self-perpetuating fashion, then it's going to be difficult to do that. So I think, and we always talk about this in terms of the tourism chain. So from the lodge operator to the protected area agency to the community conservancy to the tour operator to the local DMC to the media to the source market agent, we've all got to be talking the same language. And so in the hierarchy of how you choose a destination to send your clients, or for one of a different perspective, how you choose to certify in terms of eco-certification, we have to bump up the importance of conserving land in that hierarchy.
Thank you. And Mahanjit, what's your thoughts on that subject?
Yeah, thanks, Calvin. I think looking at it, I think I do feel post-COVID there has been a shift in a lot of travelers that are looking at traveling around the world. Mm-hmm. And I know, although we've seen a very big increase in the safari industry in the very high end, I think there is a lot of people that when they make a travel decision are looking at, is it doing good for the land or biodiversity? We've seen the impact of a pandemic, so not a pandemic. And then also really trying to find ways that they can engage in an authentic way with communities. I think when I look at a lot of the travelers that we get, there does seem to be a genuine interest in people when they're coming on holiday. They don't just want a very fancy room or nice place or just to see animals. And I think I do agree with what Chris is saying. The key thing is habitat, and how do we make that link clear to people when they make a decision to come. But I think, even more important than the habitat is whose habitat is it? And the habitat is the community landowners. And in my view, in East Africa, there is no conservation without communities. So I think if we're looking at long-term sustainability, we have to put ourselves, and it's a shame Samson is left, but we have to put ourselves, and I'm a fourth generation Kenyan, but I'm not a Maasai from that land. And just realizing, when you have a resource, which is the land they have, and you have kids that need to go to school, you need to be generating enough money. It's not about how many lions you have on there. So I think the really key thing is how is people who are tour operators or journalists and looking to send people to destinations because they maybe genuinely care about wildlife and landscape and open spaces, do they want to see that continue for another 10, 20, 50 years? And for us as investors, do I want my kids to see free roaming lions when they're my age? Because if decisions are not taken and things are not done, which is linked to the landowner that owns that land really getting a genuine, meaningful return. And in my view, as tourism, we know in the Mara conservancies, it's some of the highest payments from ecotourism to community land anywhere in the world. However, in my view, it's not enough. It's not enough. So this was there. I see there's some good questions on the comments there, and we need to continue to find more ways. And yes, livestock is one of them. We know carbon is there, biodiversity credits, ecosystem service. So I think, how do we work together with the landowners realizing that, that is the critical thing. Yeah. Thanks, Calvin.
Thank you. And I would second that with an idea that there's two kinds of values to land. The one is agricultural land. That is where what we're paying mostly is the opportunity cost of not doing another land use in terms of agriculture, like farming, fencing, farming, grass, that sort of thing, maize, corn. But there's another land use which is a particular threat in the Mara, around the Mara, and that is the speculative rental value of private houses and random folks with lots of money who now want to live on the edge of the Mara, a bit like the Kitengela effect around Nairobi Park. So this is another value that can be 20 times, 30 times, even more higher than agricultural value. And it depends on something built. And again, it comes down to, will the government have the will to enforce land use plans, which are clearly written there? Please, by the way, I don't know if we can, Sunit, if we can just add the links to all of these research and the management plans to here, so that folks can actually just download and look at them later. That'll be helpful. But will the government actually enforce them? Well, they can't without the money, because you can't tell people don't sell your land if you're going to get enough money to actually keep your family for the rest of their lives. So is that, we have to think, and through MMWCA, we're working with the tourism partners along there, how we can address that problem. Yeah, but it's a big problem, proximity value. And the other, I wanted to pose a question, which is my private, for years I've been thinking and mulling over this, is that the selling chain itself, which sells, which is the master at the abstract value capture, the tour agents and the agents and talking to the end client, and that is the proper role everyone has. But really consider that the conservancy fee that you charge is a pass-through. It's actually not it is not the tourism partner's contribution to conservation. You could go with another company, they'll still pay a conservation fee as a pass-through, which can go to a Maasai Mara National Reserve, or it can go to a national park. It's a kind of a pass-through. But in my opinion, the selling chain should be looking at a little bit like what Mahanjit is doing, what we're doing at Cottars, and that is part of our business's net profit comes back to do this as well. Our purpose is driven by biodiversity and for biodiversity conservation. And that should the selling chain also not be thinking of this? Even if you're selling safaris in Botswana, and one of the challenges that I've had is that, let me just say, in the past, we had challenges of security in Kenya. We lost a lot of business, and the agent said, well, that's my choice. I'm taking it all to Botswana. And I say to him, but hang on, we have just committed long-term leases for years, 25 years or whatever it was, and you've just taken it all away. but we still need it. How do we now? Do we mortgage our homes to lease that land? Should not the agent selling chain and the supply selling chain also join with us in that? We're not saying take away profit, but from the profit side, some portion of profit, CSR, to come down to the ground. And that's a question I'd like to pose to you, Chris. Maybe start with Chris. What is your thoughts on that?
That's what's called a hospital pass in rugby. Yeah, I'll let you know when we start making a profit how we feel about it. But yeah, look, it's complicated, and there are different ways of looking at this, like deployment of capital and return on capital. So, but it's a tricky question. A lot obviously of the trade in the source markets does contribute back through various ways. And I mean, I think you got to be careful in all of this. Obviously in the land leases, the lodge operators, the tour operators, the source market agents. Obviously there's a full spectrum of different kinds of people, different kinds of businesses, and yeah, again, I think it goes back to. No, in fact, let me reverse that. All of this boils down to the bad elements of human nature, right? And so the majority of us all have the negative aspects of human nature, the greed that drives overdevelopment, or the greed that drives whatever. And it's a minority that risk profit in altruism, I think, and perhaps that's absolutely appropriate. That's the sort of keystone of the evolution of our species, is survival. So it's a difficult question to answer, and I think it probably comes down to partnerships with the best partners in what we might consider the best land use models. Yeah, rather than an industry-wide blanket thing, because I just that'll be impossible.
I think. Thank you, Mohanjit. What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think Calvin. My view is also, I think it's very difficult. I think it sounds like a great idea, but I think practically trying to implement that, especially from tour operators and people around the world, is very difficult. I think it's, how do we, I see there's a question saying, how do you incentivize sales agents to promote more sustainable companies? And I think that's a good question. I think that's the thing we should be doing, is really how do we incentivize? So it's actually a benefit to them to do that, and a benefit to their clients, and a benefit to the habitat. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this is true. I mean, we're looking at changes in carbon and biodiversity credits to be more land focused. So there's going to be a lot of money. But when you consider the sales of the value of let's say Kenya's tourism industry, 35% goes to the selling chain, 25 or 23% to the government in taxes. Then we have 40% to work with, and there's a balance that is left for land leasing by few of us, not many of us. So it's quite a challenge anyway, we won't labor the points too much, because we have more immediate bigger fish to fry right now. But yeah, shall I just go through some of these? I see we're at 43 minutes. Maybe we can, do any of you, Chris or Mohanjit, have any particular perspectives you would like to share before we get into questions? Mohanjit?
I'll jump in quickly there, Calvin. Thank you. Yeah, I think obviously it's kind of fashionable at the moment to talk about over-tourism in Africa, and then of course the Mara, as one of the most successful kind of destinations in Africa, often bears the brunt of that. And clearly, as we've heard today from Samson and yourself and Mohanjit, there are challenges maybe in the core of the reserve. But what's inspirational, I think, and shouldn't be ignored, and I know you've alluded to it all through the core, but is the multi-land use adjacent to the park that is generating revenue for people who otherwise would only have the costs of living with wildlife. And that's been, I think, very effective. We're hearing that it's double the size of the core Mara system at the moment, and might generate, and probably does generate, more per hectare. And it's inspirational. I suppose I just wanted to make that point, in that it gets used as a model elsewhere in Africa. So, in projects we've employed in Rwanda or Madagascar, now even in Botswana, where we're taking lessons from the Kenyan experience, or the Mara experience in particular. So it's yeah, I think it's just worth noting that.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm so glad to hear that, because we live in our islands here with our dealing with our landlords, and we don't know how far it goes. But thank you for expressing that. Mohanji, do you have any perspectives that you have to offer?
Yeah, maybe I'll just say that, you know, we know often when people are looking at where to travel, that there's been, due to climate change, many people don't want to make the long haul travel, or they limit their long haul travel. Maybe just a comment around that, because we've been discussing over tourism potentially, but also realizing that a lot of this habitat outside, which we know is bigger than the park, would not be there. As you said, Calvin, when you started, the national park and reserves are already gazetted, but the area outside is owned by people and currently very driven by tourism revenue. So I think it does make sense, maybe people doing fewer long haul, but staying longer. So they're actually the same amount of revenue is coming in. But just to realize, when you look at climate change, yes, there's the carbon emissions of the flight, but how much this habitat that we're protecting in biodiversity, it's actually sequestering a huge amount of carbon, you know, whether it's soil organic carbon or the vegetation that's growing on it. And, you know, when you take places like the Mara, we're seeing anywhere from, you know, 0.8 to 1.3 tons of carbon sequestered per acre. And so if you have 450,000 acres, that's a lot of carbon every year that is being protected, that potentially would be lost from farming, from vegetation being cut. If you look at areas that's not under conservancy, there's definitely been a much higher degradation. The other thing is serious overgrazing in these areas. But having said that, there's also the negative side. I see there's a number of questions about livestock. And yes, livestock is an important revenue source and very important to our Maasai community. But having said that, I know MMWCA paid for a study to show how the lease fees are being used. And unfortunately, a lot of the lease fee payments landowners are getting is they're buying more cows with it. So that is negative, because we see more issues of cattle. And the unfortunate thing is there's been a huge increase in more sheep and goats and less cattle. So just to say, you know, it's not a perfect model, but I do see people realizing that that's not sustainable, the communities themselves, and looking for better breeds, higher quality, etc. Yeah, thanks, Calvin.
Yes, thank you. I mean, one thing that that I can say about livestock is that there's a lot of the people. It's 99% is owned by 1% of the big cattle herds. That has been a problem. But on the other hand, it's actually a temporary side effect. If the conservancies continue to expand at 20% per year, which is what they're doing at the moment in land area every year, that if enough land is secured through leases, which are always conditional to livestocking rates, that even that land where they're going will have a controlled livestock stocking rate. Likewise, when you add the absolute need for the county government to control the Mara Reserve better through the Mara Management Plan, which I know I'm on some of those committees, that they've made a big difference. They've stopped a lot of cattle into the reserve, that is being controlled much better. I mean, really a lot better. It's like down by 90% in our area inside the reserve. We're outside, but just opposite us. So there are changes afoot, and I don't think we should look at the historic livestock problems as being the way it goes with all conservancies. It's just the way that, in my view, it's just the way that we don't have enough land under security, that the extra cattle are being dominated in the places that there's no controls. And so we just have to expand conservancies. I would like to just hazard a suggestion or give a suggestion that could help in the bigger context of selling sustainable safaris to Africa. And that is, if a client can, in his home in New York or her home in New York, can click on a button and see a safari itinerary that goes all the way to Africa and 2 or 3 weeks and then back, and that has a calculator, social equity, biodiversity, and carbon calculator that shows it's better to go on safari than to stay at home, I think that's where we will win. That is how we will be able to sell long-haul travel in safaris, even over going to Italy, and especially that's very expensive to go to these countries now, Italy, France. But that is how we could win. So what do you think of that idea, gentlemen? So Mohanji.
Yeah, I think it sounds like a great idea. It sounds a bit complicated, But I think, yeah, I think it sounds a good idea. And I think maybe just to add to that, Calvin, you know, one positive thing I know we're seeing in Kenya and within the region is inter-Africa travel. And I do think that, you know, that can bring a lot more growth in the area, not just counting on the traditional market. So I think that is a critical thing for us to look at. I had an interesting question. I saw an interesting question, which I've also often thought about, which has been asked by someone. Maybe I'll take the benefit of being on the panel and asking you and Chris. It's saying,
Yep.
is there a way to embrace a lower volume, high spend model without it being elitist? And this is, to me, the challenge. You know, when you become too elitist, it's actually not ideal. So I don't know what you guys feel about that.
Well, wildlife, in my opinion, we'll ask Chris just now. In my opinion, wildlife has an abstract value, which this is not really. I mean, let me just say, safari hunting is 20 times anything to do with what we are doing. Like safari hunting is 20 times higher abstract value, but there's got a blood cost to it. I don't think if one client is paying for 10 times more land than 20 other clients, I don't think it's a negative, because all the land needs to be secured. So it's just about where you are in the market. It's like, where does the over-tourism go in the Mara? Well, if it can't go, if we're putting the prices up in the reserve itself, well, there'll probably be new conservancies created on the peripheries that tailor to those kind of, like, let's say, medium to lower budget. And that's okay, because that money will go there, and there'll be management protocols in those areas for that market. And I don't think we should say that it's elitist or not elitist. Every dollar on the ground is, if the dollar is really getting to the ground, it's worth it, and it's not elitist. If the dollar's not getting to the ground where it's needed most, then it is elitist and it's abstract. It's extractive, and that's to understand. To understand that is critical. And Chris, maybe your opinion.
Oh, yeah, I saw that question as well. It's brilliant, and I think it gets right to the heart of the matter. And I think they're impossible. What's the word? I mean, let me reverse a bit. I see it as an ecosystem, the same way you've got primary producers and consumers or what have you in some sort of triangle. I see it the same for any kind of business, but in ours in particular. So you have, let's say, lower value land priced at a lower price, and you have higher value land priced at a higher price, and less people can afford the top end of the pyramid and more can afford the bottom end of the pyramid. And this is why it's important, I think, for the state to continue to play the role that it does. So if the mandate of the state is to conserve the biodiversity or natural heritage of that country, part of the mandate of the state also is to enable access to that natural heritage for the citizens. And I think that's a critical thing. I mean, Mahanjit alluded to it just now in terms of there being more domestic or intra-African tourism. And I think, you know, number one, obviously, is the domestic market, which is bigger in some African countries than others. And then there's the intra-African stuff that has probably got I think definitely has a huge potential. But yeah, to expand low volume, high yield tourism with like to the exclusion of everything else clearly is elitist. So you've got to manage the ecosystem as if you were managing a farm. I think, you know, in some patch of amazing soil, you grow kiwi fruit or whatever's getting the best market price, and in another you grow potatoes or maize. That is more of a starch, a bulk.
We're looking at, in my belief, it doesn't always have to be leasing or biodiversity easement payments in the model that we're doing. It can also be, there's extraordinary, interesting model being developed by Lion Landscapes about around camera traps and paying a biodiversity payment per new picture of a lion or a rhino or a porcupine or whatever it might be. And that is of a lot of interest to us, but it has to be high enough to the community and to actually coalesce together and say, well, we won't fence our land. This is going to earn us enough money before we get proper leases. Our challenge is leases. There are some other very good questions here, and I'm sorry, I don't know if we have time to go through them all. But just, I hope we can actually get back to you with your emails. If you can let us know your emails. I don't know how that works. I was just seeing, we try how to ensure more accountability in regards to government accountability. So there's a question about government accountability. This is especially in regards to money trickling down. And I would agree, this is actually what the conservancies do best. If you Do a Google of Maasai Mara Wildlife Conservancy Association conservancies corruption. You won't see a single mention because there is none. The money goes directly from the lessees to the individual landowners. That is through M-Pesa. One of the miracles that Kenya has had is M-Pesa direct payment, where there's no funneling of money. And that has been one of the actual possibilities, made it possible. I think, Mahanji, you can elaborate more on that, but that's probably been one of the key things to make it uncorruptible. And what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think definitely, Calvin. We know that corruption, elite capture, not only happens in Kenya. We've seen India, America, the UK. So it's a global issue. I think, greed and poor governance is a global issue. And I think when the conservancies, 19, 18 years ago, started doing the direct payments into landowners based on the acreage of land, it's a level playing field now. It's no longer about who's the community leader or who has the leverage to be able to get more money. It's everyone getting a fair share for their land. The other big challenge I know we've seen in the Mara is that wherever there's a camp located, you get an extra bed night fee. So everybody wants a camp on his land. And that is another big challenge. But when you have significant bed night fees, lease fees going to huge numbers, now all of a sudden it kind of changes that, and the governance, there's not a reason for governance because the payment is going directly to the landowner and not through a committee or some joint project account.
Yeah, thank you. It also allows for a concept called collective benefit and liability, which is the collective will lose if one person messes up and puts cattle in or whatever it might be. There's that possibility of collective benefit and liability. We're at 56 minutes. I'm not sure how much time we have more, but any final words from you, gentlemen? Maybe Chris, you can start.
Sorry, I did try to type an answer to one of the questions in the chat, and I don't think it worked. But how do you incentivize sales agents to promote more sustainable companies and properties? I just wanted to make the point that it's a spectrum of people. They're not everyone's the same. So, and not everyone's selling to the same market. It's very difficult to generalize about that. I think closing comment from me is just that I think the publicity or the profile that the Mara has got lately is ultimately good for lots of things that the questions are asking at the moment. So accountability, and so putting these things in high profile and then actually measuring where the money went and what happened to it. So I mean, if there are 300,000 visitors to the Mara a year, all paying $200 an entry fee, $60 million, it's a fair amount of money that should have there should be accountability for that.
Yes. Absolutely, and we are working with it. We started, just for your information, we've started a Mara Investors Association formally with all the big players, and we're now engaging with the county government on a lot of these questions. We've also started a Mara CSR trust formally to channel some of this. Hopefully some of this money being generated will come through that trust to the bigger picture conservation and expanding conservation. And maybe Mahanjit, any last comments? Because I think we're at 2 minutes.
Yeah, maybe just quickly, I would just add that, in spite of all the challenges, Calvin, I think with this new governor, we have seen a lot of positive things happen, and the gazettement of the management plan and really, some positive things. I would just also add to our listeners that the Mara is an amazing destination. It's not about not coming here, but maybe about making the decision of where you're going to go, and also about, when are you going to go? We know that, the green season, after the May rains, June rains, fantastic time. There's a lot of babies, a lot of wildlife, a lot of bird life. So just to say, come to the Mara. We look forward to welcoming you.
Thank you so much. I think that that is a great comment, and I think we're all plugging for the Mara and the ecosystem and the model to work, and we want to scale it. And we're thrilled that you're all here. Thank you so much. There's still 38 of you here listening to the end. And thank you so much. And we all really appreciate your attention, and hopefully we'll do more in the future, because this is just the very scratching the surface of everything we've got to do here, and with a bigger conservation in the future.